Crusader Rex. This is a Columbia block war game that was originally published in 2005. This is the second edition with a mounted map and revised rules. I did not play the first game, so I cannot compare, but I did play this one, and I'm glad I did because I really enjoyed this game. The topic is the Third Crusade, Richard the Lionheart, Saladin, all of these epic figures from history. Two-player war game that clearly shares many ideas with other Columbia block war games. You can definitely see the family resemblance, but also there are twists and tweaks here that make this game pretty much its own thing. Anyways, let's take a closer look and see how it plays. This is the map for the game. It is on a mounted board. Very nice. It is divided in a Saracen kingdom. There's also a small Saracen area here representing Egypt. Almost everything else belongs to the Frank player. I said almost because there is this area here, which is the Assassin's Kingdom, and this is a special area. The players cannot enter there. And then here you also see kind of the initial deployment. I say kind of because here you see the Frank blocks placed in their main seat, but during setup the Frank player can move some of these blocks around, some have alternate seats, and so different player will have some freedom here. Most likely will want to consolidate some of these blocks into some larger groups. After that, the Saracen player can also switch some of his blocks around, but not as many. And then he will draw 4 random blocks from his pool and he will add them to the board. So because of these factors, this setup will change from game to game. After the players are done doing that, all the remaining blocks in their pools are flipped face down and they form the pool from which the players will draw random reinforcements later in the game. A game may last up to 6 years. Each year is divided in 6 turns, and at the beginning of each year, each player will receive 6 cards from this deck. These cards may be action cards that have an action described on them, or maybe movement cards that have a number on them. At the beginning of each turn, each player selects a card, puts it face down, then the 2 players will reveal their cards simultaneously. Actions are resolved before movement cards by simply executing what the text of the action describes. 2 actions would annul each other. If there are 2 numbers, then the higher number goes first, so the player that played the highest movement card goes first. If there is a tie, then the players just roll dice until they break the tie. For a movement point, a player can declare a group move. That is, the player chooses a location and then he can choose any and all blocks present in that location. Blocks can be moved up to their movement factor, which is the number printed there in the top left corner, and also up to road limits, which are 4 blocks per turn on a major road, and of 2 blocks per turn on a minor road. Blocks can be moved together as a group, they can be sent in different directions, there's no requirement about that. So in this case I could move these 2 blocks here and these 2 blocks here, or starting from there, all 4 blocks there. Another way to spend movement points is by using master moves. To execute a master move, the player chooses a friendly location and then moves there any and all of the blocks that can actually make it there based on their movement factors and on road limits. For example, in this case, if I choose Damascus as the center of my master move for 1 movement point and can move to Damascus that block and this block and this block here, and even all of these blocks here. So you can really form quite a large group of blocks using a master move. Another possible type of move is the C move that allows a player to move blocks from a location that has a port symbol to a friendly location that also has a port symbol. So as you can see, it can allow you to move blocks for quite a distance, but it is pretty expensive because moving blocks by C move costs 1 movement point per block, so much more expensive than if you're moving a large group in a location on land just by spending 1 movement point. After both players completed their movement in all locations where you have blocks belonging to both players, combat will follow. There are two types of combat in this game. One is field combat, that is in front of the city that is being attacked, and the other one is siege combat against the walls of the city. The number of shields associated with a city represents the number of blocks that the defender can bring inside the city so that they can defend from inside the walls. In this case, the different player could bring 3 units inside Jerusalem, leaving that guy to fend for himself. Or the front player could just choose to leave everybody in the field, chew and chew, any combination as long as that limit is not exceeded. If there are defenders in the field, the attacker must attack those first. If they're eliminated and there are still rounds of combat available, then the attacking player may use those rounds of combat to attack the units inside the city. Field combat is resolved using concepts that are pretty common in Columbia block games. Blocks attack in the order indicated by their initiative rating, which is represented by that ladder up there. All A blocks attack before all B blocks before C blocks. All the A's of the defender attack before all the A's of the attacker, all the B's of the defender before the B's of the attacker, and so forth. In this case, if the starting player is the attacker, this block still goes first because it is the only block that has a rating of A, but then you have the B's of the defender and the B's of the attacker. An attacking block rolls a number of dice equal to its present strength, which is indicated by the number of pips on top of the block, in this case 4, 4, 2, and 3. And an attacking block inflicts a hit on the opponent for each number that it rolls, which is equal to or less than the number to hit indicated on the top right corner of the block. In this case, for example, suppose that that block is attacking, it rolls 4 dice, it hits with 2 or less, so in this case that block scored 2 hits against the enemies. The owning player assigns the hits. Blocks cannot be targeted individually, but hits must always be assigned to the healthiest unit. In this case, the friend player has a unit that has 4 points of strength, a unit with 2 and one with 3, so the one with 4 has to take the first hit. But now there are 2 units that have 3 points of strength, so this second hit can be assigned to either of these, and suppose this one is assigned. As you can see, you have this very elegant way of keeping track of the health of your blocks by simply rotating them by 90 degrees when they lose health or when later they recover it. Some units in this game also have special combat abilities. Frank, Knights, and Crusaders, such as these ones, can charge. That means that they can attack with the number to hit increased by 1. This block when charging would hit with a 4 or less, pretty powerful, but charging is a dangerous maneuver, and a charging block would actually take a hit for each 6 that it rolls, so that is the danger in that. Other units such as the Frank Turco Poles or the many nomads that the starting player can employ. This is just a small sample. These units can attack and retreat in the same round, whereas usually in a combat round, a block can either attack or retreat, not both. If all defending blocks are inside the walls of a castle, like in this example, then you have siege combat. During each round of siege combat, the attacker can decide to storm the walls of the defender. The number of shields that a castle has also represents the maximum number of blocks that can storm the walls of a castle. When the attacker is storming the walls, you resolve a regular round of combat between all units that are involved in the fight, but now it takes the attacker 2 hits to reduce an enemy block by 1 step. Yes, the defender is defending on top of the walls, so that is quite an advantage. It makes it much harder to hit them and to reduce them. If the attacker decides not to storm the walls of a castle, then the defender may sally. That is, may come out and attack the attackers. When the defender sallies, you have a normal round of combat, but this is happening in the field in front of the walls, not against the walls, so there are no bonuses, no modifications for either side. If in a round of siege combat the attacker doesn't storm and the defender doesn't sally, then the combat phase is over and you move to resolve attrition. But even if the players keep attacking each other at the end of the combat phase, you will have attrition. You have attrition every turn in which there are blocks on one side besieging blocks on the other side. To resolve attrition, you roll a die for each besieged block. If you roll a 1, 2, or 3, the block loses a step. At the beginning of the game, each player receives a pool of reinforcement blocks. Then, during the game, many of the blocks that are eliminated from the map will be added to these pools. Starting from year 2, at the end of each turn, the players will draw a random block from their pool. The assassin player is allowed to add the drawn block immediately to the map. Things are a little trickier for the Frank player. Some blocks can be immediately brought to the map. Some other blocks must first placed on the corresponding box on this area of the map here. These are crusades, so I guess it takes a little longer to put them together to organize the entire thing. In fact, the Frank player is allowed to bring in blocks from these groups only once all 3 blocks of a certain group have been collected. In this case, for example, the Frank player would be allowed to bring in these blocks from England using C moves, but he cannot count on German and French reinforcements yet. There are 7 victory cities on the map. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. At the end of the 6th year, the player that controls the majority of the cities is the winner. But there's also a sudden death victory condition. If at the end of any game turn a player controls all 7 victory cities, then the game ends prematurely with the victory of that player. This is a game that to me thrives on elegance and economy. It doesn't have a million rules, sub-rules, exceptions, and yet it delivers a very rich and complex and engaging experience because you can see that a lot was factored in the design itself. The map, the road net, the cities, meaning the strength of the cities and the castles, the strength of the blocks, the way the blocks are added to the board. Everything comes together beautifully, seamlessly, and really creates an engaging experience. The sieges clearly are what really gives this game its own personality. I was afraid maybe they would make the game too complicated to use it as an introductory war game. Not at all. I played with a friend who had never played a block war game before, and we had no problem. The game went smoothly and we had a lot of fun. It is great to have the special attacks of some of the blocks, the charges, the blocks that can attack and retreat. That adds a lot of historical flavor, a lot of thematic flavor, and of course also adds more decisions. This is just a game that has a lot to offer. I had read somewhere that earlier editions of the game were unbalanced because the Saracen player clearly had an advantage. I think this has been evened out here. This really has been improved. I still had the impression that the Saracen player has an edge toward the middle of the game when every turn he receives blocks that he can use immediately, whereas the Frank player will receive some blocks that can be used, but some other blocks that get stuck in those groups that you are forming before you can add them to the board. But if the Frank player survives that phase, then the big reinforcements come in and of course things change. So I still think the Frank side is a little more challenging to play, but not to a point where the game feels broken or unbalanced or anything like that. In sum, this is a game that I like a lot. It has elegance, it has beauty of gameplay, it is exciting. I think it manages to combine a really nice degree of both abstraction and yet theme that is conveyed through those abstractions. To me, this is a new gem that is added to the crown of the Columbia block war game system. Okay. It is not a new gem. It is a gem that now has been polished and shines even more.